Hello out there, everyone in podcast land. This is Blake from the Gray 17 podcast, part of the Front Row Network and NPR Illinois Community Voices. And we are here today with a St. Patrick's Day special. We have a special guest with us, Seán Ferrick from Trek Culture. Welcome, Seán.
Thank you very much. How are you getting on? Happy St. Patrick's Day to you.
Yes, we're doing pretty well here. Now, one thing just to start off with, as I follow your Twitter, and I know there is a very important issue you've wanted to clarify for our American audiences, and that is, it is St. Patrick's Day or St. Patty's Day, but there is not a T in Patty's.
That it is not, St. Patrick was not a piece of meat. He is not a patty. So yes, take it from an Irishman. Patty is not part of St. Patrick's Day. We know an awful lot of time it's said with love, but yeah, it's Paddy's Day or St. Patrick's Day.
So that is an important PSA for our American audience from an actual Irishman on how to say St. Patty's Day or St. Patrick's Day.
Perfect. Yep.
Just wanted to get that out of the way. That was a very important topic we wanted to cover here. But let's dig in a little bit. Obviously, you do the ups and down reviews with Trek Culture, which I'm a big fan of. I will actually say, watching some of those, I did COVID response for work, so very stressful time at the start of that. And watching some of those Trek Culture vids was my moment of getting away. So big fan of what you all do over at Trek Culture.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. That was really, really touching. Thank you.
So looking at Star Trek, though, there's this whole debate out there, right? New Trek versus old Trek. What is Star Trek? What isn't? And as we've commented on our show with Picard, this is a cycle. Like they were saying the same thing 30, 40 years ago with Next Gen.
100%. The only difference between now and then is now we have Twitter. That is the only difference.
And boy, what a difference has that made.
Twitter is many things. It is fantastic in that it's allowed so many people to come together. It's allowed communities to grow. It has also allowed us access to the people who make the shows in ways that we never had before. And that has led to some amazing discussions, some amazing behind the scenes details, some, exploration of how decisions were made. And then, so on the flip side of that is that there are those who, they have their concerns, they have their general worries about Star Trek, and they quite in an inappropriate way approach people and very, very vociferously kind of, because I'm trying to be kind, because there's a difference between the people who have a legitimate concern, who maybe could phrase things better, and trolls. That there is a difference. There are people who are just like, they are out to upset people. And then, of course, there's the other one where there's bots, and they'll upset you, but you're never going to upset them back because they're a line of code.
Yeah. Well, I think you're absolutely right with that, because watching, especially when Discovery came out, some of the commentary directed at Sonequa Martin Green, then there's been follow-up, Stacey Abrams had a guest spot on there, and I remember watching Twitter after that, when she was the president of Earth at the end of that season. And I remember watching, Twitter's head explode over that. And that was just an interesting one. But also looking at New Trek, I think one of the other areas where it's really brought out some of this online presence is Star Trek has always been a little bit ahead of the curve, but even to, the Trek Culture vid that they put out the other day with some of the more problematic points, there have been points in Star Trek where they've not always got it right. And one of those has been around queer representation, particularly transgender issues. There was a couple of good examples pointed out in there, but newer Trek seems to be doing a lot more with that. You've got Stamets and Culber, you've got Adira, you've got these different characters in Discovery who are really playing in now, but there's also been that backlash that's came with it.
There has, because I think, now this is going to sound really, really reductive, but new frightens people. So some exposure to something that they might not have dealt with before, and I am massively generalizing here, don't get me wrong, but exposure to things that they might not have experience with or have seen before can be frightening and can be something that they're not ready for. So today's topic is the issue of transgender rights and queer representation. In Deep Space Nine, there was many issues of where race was the topic of the day. And, there was the idea of, oh my God, a person of color can command a crew? Really? Of course, then we need only look at, some of the criticism against Voyager. Kind of, oh my God, a person of color is one thing, but a woman? And it's whatever the topic is, there will be people who will be there to push back. There will be people who will be there to go, this is the phrase you hear an awful lot, this is not my Star Trek. And you kind of have to wonder, it's like, okay, well, what is your Star Trek then? Is it, are we just going to look at all the episodes where Kirk rips his shirt? Because, surprise, in some of those episodes, we talk about some pretty heady topics as well. That's the great comparison between a lot of what Star Trek is doing now, which a lot of it, and there is one fair point, is that there is a lot of it is not subtle these days. I will say that. I mean, I don't particularly feel that that's a criticism, but I mean, yes, there's a lot of it is not subtle. But then, I mean, this is a well-worn example. The original series, Beale and Lukai, Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, was about as subtle as a brick to the face about how silly racism is. It's like, oh, well, I'm this shade and I'm this shade. Yeah, but I'm this shade and this shade. I'm not seeing the point here. And, when you come forward into Discovery, I think Discovery is the one that has led the charge a lot, and also has been the one that has taken the most criticism for various reasons. One is, for a while, it was the only Star Trek, so it was the only one where people could direct their criticism. It was also, like, from the off, it was different. You had episode 1, you had a person of color was commanding the Shenzhou. You had a person of color was the first officer. You had an alien then after that. You had, obviously the Klingons look very, very alien. There was all of these discussion, and it was, what's going on? There was an awful lot of, criticism. I rewatched the episodes there last week. They are stunningly beautiful. I mean, they are an actual work of art. Like, they are beautiful, beautiful pieces of fiction and literature. So then, as we go along, when you start to, people are picking up on, oh God, season 3, Adira, did we have to stop the episode to discuss pronouns and discuss? It's like, I actually think that was handled quite well, because we didn't stop for, if we think of the 90s, we didn't stop for a very special episode about non-binary people. We didn't do that. We just said, they just corrected Stamets, and that was it. There was no kind of, like, beating anyone over the head with it. And even that, then some people, not everyone, and it's very important, I think, for us to remember that, yes, very, very loud people have railed against a lot of this, but they are loud because they are in the minority. There is those who will, it doesn't matter what happens every week, they will be there ready to go with the I hate ... put in today's topic. There will be the others. There will be those who are ready with I love ... put in today's topic. And then there's the massive silent people who don't get involved in the online discourse, who watch it anyway. And we can get very caught up with the extreme loves and the extreme dislikes. And I am no angel for this one. I most certainly got caught up in this myself. But if we go back then to TOS, Next Gen, DS9, Voyager, and into Enterprise, a lot of this was happening, but it was people in their homes going, I have no one to shout at. I have no one to talk to.
So I think you mentioned Deep Space Nine, especially with race, and I always go back to this. Probably one of my favorite episodes of that whole series is Far Beyond the Stars, because the way that episode handled the topic of race and looked at the reality. And even though it was set in kind of that 50s, 60s timeline, it was still so relevant when it came out. And even still now, that to me is one of, you know, Star Trek at its finest, doing what it does.
That was there are some episodes from the 90s that I remember watching first watch. You know, they just burn into your memory. And Far Beyond the Stars is one of them. Like, there is so much going on in 40 minutes of storytelling. You know, it is an absolute piece of sci-fi. You know, they don't lose the fact that it's a you know, piece of science fiction. They managed to, if I was doing my ups and downs and I have my Easter egg counter, I would have a full Easter egg counter. There's lots of them there. And the crushing thing, other of course than Avery Brooks is just an outstanding performance, is how normalized racism is in their depiction of the 50s. You know, Rene Auberjonois was Pabst. He's like, it's nothing personal, Benny. You know, you're a black man. Of course you're not going to be on the cover. And it's just like, that's incredibly personal, Doug. That is incredibly personal. No. It's just the way things are, and how they handle the way things are. With, you know, and railing against this character who is so beaten down and so broken, and yet still has hope. That's, I think, if Benny didn't have hope, there would be no breakdown. And that's kind of that's Star Trek. There is going to be a better tomorrow. What was it? You know, Gene Roddenberry always said, the human race would get to a utopia, but it would go through hell to get there.
Yeah.
And you know, there's a few years now until the Vulcans arrive, but if they wanted to come early, that would be fine.
Yeah, they can speed that up, just no problem.
No problem at all. Yeah, they can stay with me. It's no problem.
Yeah. And you mentioned, you know, that early 90s thing too, about you had episodes when they did delve into some of the more sensitive issues. They kind of had these disclaimers. And I remember there was the episode of Deep Space Nine where Jadzia encountered one of her former hosts' former partner. And I remember where I was at, and I understand this wasn't everywhere, but where I was at, they ran a disclaimer ahead of that episode about the content of that episode because the two kissed. There were other parts of the US where that episode was not even aired or was blocked out.
I do remember. So we did a bit of a deep dive on that episode recently enough, and I remember a very funny story of I cannot remember who it was took the call, but somebody rang anyway, Paramount, and they were ready to, you know, this is the worst thing ever. And whoever took the call said, you know, okay, what is your issue with this? You know, you're exposing this to my children. And they went, okay. Did you watch Way of the Warrior, where all of the Klingons storm the station and stab Kira, and, you know, there's blood and guts and phaser fire? Yeah, of course. What's the issue? And they went, well, you've just answered your own question there.
Yeah.
You know, and it ties back in again to what is new, or what is something we don't want to see. People can rail against. And of course, the obvious comparison to this, considering it's a kiss, is Plato's Stepchildren, going all the way back to the 60s. And, you know, that famous kiss between Uhura and Kirk. And, you know, that entered infamy pretty quickly. So it actually, you know, although it was a massively important thing, it was not the first interracial kiss on television, which became part of the, you know, kind of, everyone chill out. It's not the first time this has happened, you know. And yep, there were some states wouldn't run it, you know, because, you know, you have to wonder, say that man that rang in to say, you're exposing this terrible thing to my children of, you know, two women kissing, be like, right, how did you feel about Kirk and Uhura kissing? Okay. And maybe, and look, I'm being kind, maybe this person was not a racist and was simply a homophobe, but you're kind of like, they are as innocuous as each other. It was not, you know, nor was it a scene of the pair of them tearing each other's clothes off on primetime television and, you know, kind of going full Game of Thrones or something on it. It wasn't like that. It was a beautifully handled scene that was not gratuitous either. And that was again, so it wasn't. I feel it wasn't done for the male gaze. It wasn't done, as a ho ho. Here's two women kissing. Ho ho. There was none of that. It felt organic, and there is tragedy in the episode as well. And it's simply the fact that it's two women kissing. I the mind boggles at like how is that? How do people find that like unpleasant or wrong or anything like that? The two people were clearly in love.
Exactly. And that's kind of one of those, I mentioned we're a Babylon 5 podcast primarily, and I know we've tweeted your thoughts a couple times, and you said you have not watched that series, but that was another one that really, for politics and issues, contemporary to DS9 kind of pushed the envelope. They had a openly bisexual character on the show that was just, but it was never stated. It was just part of who she was. It was a matter of fact, this is what it is, moving on, which was kind of unheard of to do something that way in the 90s. And it was a human character. It wasn't an alien. It wasn't a former life. It was just the character as it was, which was, again, for the 90s, kind of a rare thing.
That is, so obviously you're right. I with my extreme apologies, I've not watched Babylon 5. That's interesting because in the 90s, you could have understood if they're like, well, what if we make this person an alien? And then part of their alien culture is that there is this bisexuality. To make it a human, that's brave in the 90s.
Yeah, because it was Claudia Christian on that as the station's first officer, Commander Ivanova. So that was kind of an interesting one, especially for me, seeing that kind of representation in the 90s as well. So transitioning a little bit, you've been doing the ups and downs for Picard season 3. If I recall correctly, you were at the LA premiere, weren't you?
Well, I was indeed. Yes, I was lucky enough to be invited, myself and Chris Thompson as well. So myself and Chris, we share the lion's share of the ups and downs. He is the editor. We co-write the thing together. The man is often the unsung hero because we'll put the script together, I'll film it and send it to him, and then we lock him in a box. We leave him some water and bread until the video gets turned around. But yes, we went to the premiere together, and it was it was cool.
And I believe, because I follow him as well, I believe you can find Chris at Edit Chris Edit is his.
100%. Yep, Edit Chris Edit. Yep.
And does great work there too. So our team, Scott and I we still don't quite know how this happened. This is one of those things of being fans that when it dropped in our lap, we actually got the first 6 screeners.
Amazing.
So we've been watching that. And again, it's kind of one of those, as a fan, first we're fanboys and we're sitting there going, oh God, how did we get this? And, completely nerding out on it and then texting back and forth. But what have you thought of the season so far?
I've loved it. I mean, I don't think I've particularly made a secret of that in the ups and downs. It is a series made for fans of the Next Generation, fans of Deep Space Nine, fans of Voyager. There's so much nostalgia, but it doesn't lose itself in the nostalgia. And that's a difficult line to walk because there are, when we talk about fan service, there are some things out there where things can get lost in fan service. And, you might on one hand be like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then on the second watch, you're like, oh, that just lost like 70% of its impact because I knew the twist or I knew what was happening. And there are a couple of episodes so far where they certainly put their heads on the block for that being the case, but I think they have managed to balance it well. Now I'm the same as you. I was lucky enough. I've received the screeners, so I'm not going to say what, but between you and me, next week is going to blow people's minds.
Yeah. This week did too. I admit, when I watched episode 5, I shot Scott a message like, "Oh, holy, it's blank showed up." I trying to avoid spoilers just in case people haven't watched it yet.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I will say, Scott and I were also commenting, though, when we got to this week, that I believe it was Monday, Trek Culture put out the video of most underutilized characters in Star Trek. And number 1 was Ro Laren. So we were commenting back and forth that interesting video.
It was. We were so full disclosure. We had a chat with the PTB ahead of that, because now we started writing that on the 22nd of November 2022, because believe me, we needed to show screenshots. And it was just there was a moment a question was asked, a very fair question was asked, and we were like, I understand why you're asking that. That is not the case, but I absolutely understand why you're asking that. But it was just goes to show how much people want this character, how much people have been looking forward to this character. Talk about the long game in terms of resolution. And also I was there thinking, when we were putting that list together, it's like, right, who do we really need to see that we felt it just isn't done, it's not finished. I mean, how many videos do we have out there where I'm like, nobody, no death, nobody, no death? Sela would be another big one. Obviously Tuvix. I mean, Tuvix is coming back for his revenge. Oops, I've given away the big finale of the season. It was Tuvix the whole time. And that's the challenge, I think, going into this season, is what storylines can be outstanding that we can touch on that will fit into the main bulk of the season. I'm really not trying to talk spoilers for what's come out so far. I was mostly satisfied with episode 5, put it that way.
Yeah, I really did enjoy that episode as well. And the one thing we've had the opportunity, we did an interview with Stephen Barton. We've actually had Terry Metalis on chat with us. We're trying to get something arranged there, but also we've had Todd Stashwick on. And the one thing we've commented on is, not just has this season been put together for fans, but it's been put together by fans. Yes. And I think that's made a huge bit of difference. I mean, we talked with Stephen Barton for an hour, and then almost another 45 minutes just nerding out with him on Star Trek and sci-fi. And to hear the passion he has for the franchise and that Terry Metalis has for the franchise, you can see that on the screen.
Yes. I mean, absolutely everything. And so I think we're always going to end up, once the dust settles on this season, Star Trek Picard as a show, I feel, is as close to an anthology series as Star Trek has ever done, because the 3 seasons are so different from each other. And there are those who think that season 1 is the best thing that was ever made. There are those who think that season 2 is the best thing that ever made. And there will be those who think that season 3 is the best thing ever made. You are all correct. That is the main thing, because it is not our place to turn around and say to somebody else, you're wrong. You enjoy what you enjoy. I personally am enjoying season 3 the most. I think everything is ticking correctly. There are things that I would have liked more Elnor. I understand that where Rios' story went, we couldn't do this, but I would have loved to see more Rios. There is a sacrifice going from season 2 to season 3. That the Picard of the first 2 seasons, a lot of the characters, their storylines take them in other directions. But I suppose, I mean, as a Next Generation fan, season 3 is ticking all the boxes for me. And as a DS9 fan, but it's just good writing as well. At the end of the day, like, it's good writing. It's certainly good acting, but it's well written, and it feels to me, of the 3 seasons, it's more coherent. That it feels like, obviously we still have some episodes to go, but I don't have a feeling in my head of like, they have no idea where they're going with this, do they? They do not know where this story is going to leave people. Oh dear, we're going to have a big, massive mess of an ending. And I want to be very kind in how I say this, season 1 suffered from that, because they didn't know where they were going with the ending, when they started filming. And they're certainly not the only production that's ever happened to. I'm not trying to demonize season 1 and the people involved. But it is a very, very difficult job to try and pull off a coherent season if you're already filming and you don't have your final script written.
Yeah. And I would agree with that. And the one thing I tell people is, when it comes to Star Trek, I'm a fan of all of it, whether it be the older shows, the newer shows, the movies. I will say the only movie I actually refuse to watch because I just cannot stand it is Into Darkness. That personally, I'm just not a fan of that one for many, many reasons. But Beyond is one of my favorite movies of the entire franchise. I think that one was incredibly underrated and suffered more from what it followed than as a film on its own.
Yes.
But it's all Star Trek to me. I've never watched and even went, this just isn't my Star Trek. There's ones I like more than others. There's seasons within shows I like more than others. So it's just interesting how people lock into that and want to get into the, no, you're wrong, I hate this, and so should you. It's always been an interesting dynamic to me on that.
It is. And again, I want to be kind because there's so many different, there's a lot of people that will go, not my Star Trek, and you are wrong, and this and this, but they don't all come at it from the same, vitriol.
Mm-hmm.
There are those who they feel let down. They feel like the message of, the earlier shows was lost along the way, lost in maybe, the sheen and the glamour of how it looks better now. And even in me saying it looks better now, I'll probably have upset someone in saying that. And I'm not here to say that anyone is wrong for their feelings. I have had some really interesting discussions that have started with people hating Discovery particularly. That does seem to be the one they come back to a lot. But when you speak to them about it, it's less to do with Star Trek Discovery and more to do with this feeling of, well, this comfort blanket I had when I was growing up, for whatever reason, whether it was a crutch to me, whether it was just something I shared with family, that feels like that's not there anymore. And that is a very different discussion. That is, and then because a lot of the time that's a discussion. There are those then that are, that they were never interested in talking. There are those that, now these are in the extreme minority, but there are those who it's all performative. It is a brand, and they are, and listen, I do not condone, I do not enjoy any of this, but I can be like, all right, Grant, it's your job. So, I mean, I'll leave you to it. There's nothing I can say is going to change your mind because it's about ratings at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And, I just don't engage there because if I will talk to absolutely anyone about absolutely anything as long as we can talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And because there are, I will put my head on the block right now. Season 1 of The Next Generation is not a good season of television.
No,
I am sorry. There's someone out there who's been like, well, I've just unsubscribed from Trek Culture and I'm unfollowing this guy. Because tonally it was all over the place, and the pacing was so strange. And of course, this is a brand new group of actors who are trying to figure out what the character is. Data from season 1 and Data from season 7, they are two different androids.
Yeah.
Someone went off to android school during the season break, and the person who came back, he was laughing and joking with Riker and the pilot, going, Pop goes the weasel, marvelous, but that's fine, because early episodes, not all the time, but early episodes of any series they take a little time to find their feet. Of the earlier Star Treks, the two shows that I think have the strongest first seasons, one is DS9. I think it is a fantastic story, and there are certainly episodes in there that I don't love. But and also Justice for Move Along Home, which is, of course, the greatest episode of Star Trek ever made. The original series has an incredibly strong first season because there was really a feeling if they came out the gate knowing who they were and what they wanted to do. I have a lot of sympathy for people today who might be discovering the original series for the first time, and they might struggle with what a 60s television show was. In terms, I mean, it's so different across the way it's filmed, the sound, depending on if you can find the unremastered versions out there somewhere, and if you can watch them, you could be like, I can see the strings. You know, it's part of the charm of the 60s, you know. Then of course they remastered everything, and if you can see the strings, trust me, they deliberately left the strings in. But you know, season 1, we had City on the Edge of Forever. I mean, that's season 1, and it's one of the greatest pieces of sci-fi television ever made. You have Balance of Terror, the submarine episode, you know, which is, you know, that's I'm sure everyone has a different list of their top 10 episodes of Star Trek, but I would hazard a guess that you would get probably City on the Edge, and going into DS9 season 1, probably Duet would turn up in top 10 over the whole franchise. But of course, that's evolving because we have so much more Star Trek to get through now.
Well, and mentioning Balance of Terror, I would say, because I'm a huge fan of Strange New Worlds, I love how they've done that, but the finale for Strange New Worlds, where they did that opposite look at Balance of Terror,
I was so I did not make a secret of the fact that anyone within a 10-mile radius of my apartment, when Admiral Pike stood up, heard me. Okay, so I mean, I don't even know what the noise was that came out of me, but I know it was loud. I know it was like, you know, kind of things where, you know, the flock of birds takes off from the trees, because, you know, it was so well done. That could have fallen on its face, that episode. You know, you bringing in like that Admiral Kirk, bringing in a beloved classic episode, bringing in, of course, Kirk. This was a risk, and by God, I think they nailed it.
Yeah.
You know,
and as a fan of the 80s movies too, I have to admit, I loved that it was the monster maroon they brought back too.
That day I went to eBay and I went to the tailors and I was just like, hello, have you made it yet? They're like, let us, the episode's only just aired, give us a second. It's like, you know, every hour, hello, have you made it? I can now confirm that, yes, I have received that monster maroon, and it makes you feel so happy inside. It is a beautiful, sorry, shout out to Bernadette Croft, who is the costume designer on Strange New Worlds. What she has managed to do with the look of that season, I think, is fantastic, because, you know, you're both honoring the original series but modernizing it for a 2022-2023 audience. I never thought we'd get the monster maroon. I really didn't. Because you know, TNG used it and it was lovely. In Voyager, we had flashback and everything, and that was great. It was so much fun. Oh, excuse me, sorry. Oh my God. But seeing it in Strange New Worlds, and it's both altered and yet instantly recognizable. Like, I think it absolutely works. I love the deltas down the shoulders and the arms, for example.
Yeah, I just love that. And then that's all overall Strange New Worlds. Things are modernized, but still that familiarity to them. You know where you're at and what they're doing. So kind of looking forward, we just got the announcement not that long ago, Discovery is ending with season 5. We do know we've got Strange New World season 2 coming, and allegedly there's a Section 31 series coming, although that's been talked about for a while. What are you looking forward to as Star Trek goes forward, or hoping that we get moving forward?
I have a curveball answer. Is I cannot wait for season 2 of Star Trek Prodigy. I have loved Star Trek Prodigy because it's such pure Star Trek. It is about bringing these heady topics and these, you know, these adult topics, but handling it in such a way that all audiences can enjoy it. There was that worry, I think, when it initially announced that, like, oh God, Star Trek's doing a kids show. What's this going to be like? And then it dropped. And yes, absolutely. I mean, it's airing on Nickelodeon. Yes, it is safe for younger viewers. But that's how I would describe it. It's safe for younger viewers. It's not aimed at younger viewers. And that has led to its own whole set of issues, because there's been a very interesting lack of marketing for Star Trek Prodigy, which is just, it's been heartbreaking. We, for the ups and downs, for example, we, of course, we, episode 1, episode 2, episode 3, and no one on our side of the pond had seen Prodigy, because not many people knew it was there. There was a very, very strange rollout of Paramount Plus. Then there was also that, just like the marketing was it was all over the place. Now, then there was the season break in the middle, and it helped for people to then have time to go, oh, they went back and rewatched the first 10 and saw what it was, and like, oh, yeah, Janeway's back, and we have allusions to Chakotay and things like that, and it's it's wonderful. Now, it's still its own show. It's not Voyager 2, but it is its own show, and yet it is still absolutely within the current Trek atmosphere. And with Star Trek Picard coming to an end, which was always the case, Star Trek was always a 3-season deal. That leaves Prodigy and Lower Decks as the only two in this time period. And of the two, Lower Decks is one of my favorite television shows. I love it. I usually howl with laughter in every episode, because there'll be some throwaway gag that's going to be like, how did you work that reference in? But of the two of them, Prodigy is the one that's pushing the story forward. Lower Decks is a celebration for the fans by it, very like what you were saying about Picard season 3. Lower Decks is about celebrating Trek as a whole. I think it would be a more difficult show to bring new fans in, even though it's that fun, Rick and Morty style, joking, and it's all over the top. And I still don't know how they're going to work this Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds crossover. I mean, 2 different time periods. One of them's a cartoon, and yet the people who have seen it have been teasing us with, you have no idea how funny this episode is going to be, and I cannot wait.
And I did see that I believe they announced Jonathan Frakes is directing that one, and it's going to be interesting.
It's going to be. It just seems like, all right, I'm already expecting it to be the most franchise celebratory episode ever. Frakes directing, Strange New Worlds. I think as far as I know, the bulk of it is live action, but it's not entirely live action. And I'm just like, how, but brilliant, but how? And I'm seriously excited.
Yeah, that I am too. I am looking forward to that, to see exactly how they do that. Personally, I'm hoping Badgie somehow gets involved in that.
I would love, because I'd love to see Badgie versus Spock.
Yeah. It's exactly what I was saying. It was Badgie versus Spock could just be hilarious.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, it would be gas. But I could just Tendi and Boimler running through the Enterprise. And also, I mean, like, if you see Tendi or Tony Newsom and Jack Quaid in cosplay, I mean, they are Tendi and Boimler. Like, it's, it's perfect how they were, the character animations were done.
Yeah, because I saw that I believe it was the Las Vegas panel they did that at, where they cosplay, and you're right, they're like, there they are. That's Boimler and Mariner right there. Perfect.
Yeah, we'll have to see now if Boimler does the Boimler pose in the episode, if they find a way to work it in.
That would be awesome. So looking with that, one of the things I did ask, we've got kind of a large cast. The way we do our show is we've got about 4 of us that are longtime fans of sci-fi and have watched Star Trek, have watched B5 more than we care to admit on multiple rewatches. But we also brought a group of our friends in. We've got 6 of our friends who have joined us and who are not necessarily Star Trek fans or sci-fi fans and have never seen B5 before. Some of them have never even watched Star Trek before. And we're introducing them to this genre. Is there anything you would say to them as they come into this genre, as they are exploring these topics in this way for the first time.
Star Trek can be an endurance test. And depending on how, so they might come in original series TNG DS9, they might start in the middle. It's not so much keep an open mind, it's allow your mind to be led by the show. A lot of the time it knows what it's doing. You know, there might be some stories that might seem to go absolutely nowhere or whatever, but some of the best moments of Trek are some of the quietest. Then be kind to the original series. It was made the 60s, you know, and there's a lot of 60s in there. You know, there's a lot of things that have not aged very well. Myself and my friend, we just rewatched The Cage, you know, and Pike couldn't get used to a woman on the bridge. You're like, okay, you know, that doesn't last. I'll say that, you know, don't worry. We don't, you know, in Enterprise, Archer doesn't turn around and look at T'Pol and say, I'm just not used to a woman on the bridge. Because T'Pol, I think, would just nerve pinch him and leave the room. It is not perfect. Star Trek is not perfect. And there are mistakes that stand out the more time goes by. There's been a lot of instances, original series right through, where it has not been amazing in terms of feminism. It has incredible strong female characters, but we rewatched the original series recently, and particularly the second season of the original series was not good for representation of women. And there was a lot, I mean, obviously, and then there's the infamous final episode of the original series. You know, I think the last episode, or the last line of dialogue of Star Trek, the original series, was, she could have had a life as fulfilling as anyone's if she weren't a woman. And it was like, oh my God, we're going out with this. This is what you want the last words of the... So there are things that have dated quite poorly. And I think it's interesting, look at those through where we've got to, as opposed to, you know, as problematic as they can be, then kind of look at Star Trek now has come leaps and bounds on. You know, I don't think anyone's going to look at Star Trek Discovery and say, it's not very good the representation of women. Oh, really? Michelle Yeoh and Sonequa Martin Green have something to say about that. And, you know, particularly queer representation was one of the things that Star Trek before Discovery just didn't get right. You know, the episode you mentioned, Rejoined, was a beautiful episode. That was one episode in 176 of DS9. Then The Outcast, of course, which is another often discussed episode of TNG, where they touch on gender and conversion therapy. It got a lot of pushback from LGBTQIA groups at the time, and I think understandably so, because they felt teased, not teased and being made fun of, but teased and it didn't go nearly far enough. For example, Frakes has said since that he thinks the episode would have been stronger if Sauron had been played by a male actor. And then because the whole episode is Sauron's exploration of what it means to be female. And he said, look, just in the early 90s, they weren't doing that. They just weren't going to do that. Writers like Ronald D. Moore have come out since, and they've been they've been really honest about it. They said, look, it wasn't our priority at the time. But that was not I don't care. That was I want to be straight with you. Like, don't sugarcoat how you talk about us. Don't say that, you know, it just wasn't our priority at the time. We were dealing with other things, and it's honest. I have to admit, it's honest, and I appreciate that. And also because Ronald D. Moore then goes on to make Battlestar Galactica and is making For All Mankind. Like I am not concerned about if there's any kind of bigotry in Ronald D. Moore. I'm not worried about that. So I think somebody watching Trek now will look at this amazing franchise that is so forward facing and so utopian, and they'll be like, well, where are these people? Or why are we not talking about that? And I think that's a fair question for which there is answers. So this is a very long way of saying sometimes homework comes with Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
And me personally, I mean, I've made it my job to do homework on Star Trek. That's how much I love doing homework. Every teacher I was ever in school with is listening to this, going to be like, well, you didn't show us that at school, Seán. I was like, well, I learned eventually. And Star Trek is also pioneering so many things as well. It might have introduced something that it didn't do brilliantly that was picked up in other shows. Stargate, for example. So I know, obviously, I haven't watched B5, but another contemporary of Star Trek, particularly in the 90s, would have been Stargate SG-1.
Mm-hmm.
And there was, you could see, because SG-1 is its own very strong show. It's also a complete love letter to sci-fi as a whole. Mm-hmm. And, it's done as realistically as you can with a wormhole sitting in Cheyenne Mountain. But I love when they have their light speed ship and they're like, did you get my application? Sir, we're not calling it the Enterprise.
Yeah.
Like, why? You will see now when you go back and watch Star Trek, a lot of it in the original series, but a lot of it in TNG as well, you will go, I recognize that, because it inspired so many things in so many other writing franchises, novels. There's a lot of books that have come out of this as well, comic books, merchandise, of which they saw me coming. I have a room full of merchandise, which is why I don't give my address out, because if anyone breaks in, I'll be very sad.
I can imagine that would be the case, because I've got a few things for that same reason that I just keep hidden.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I've never learned how to deadlock a door as well as I have in the last few years. But yeah.
So one last thing, I mean, you're on Twitter, you do Trek culture, you're a writer, you've got some other projects, I believe. Anything you want to talk about or tell folks where to find your work, or anything you've got coming up?
Well, yes, thank you very much. So obviously Trek culture, as you said, you will find us. We're there all the time on YouTube. We're on Twitter and Instagram. So Twitter at Trek Culture, Instagram at Trek Culture YT. So for myself as well, I have a project with my co-host Joseph Hurley. It's called the Clone Star Podcast. And that started as two Irish lads talking about the original animated series. I had never watched it. Joseph was horrifically offended by the fact that I had never watched it, and said, right, we need to fix that, and let's just record an episode. Not thinking it would ever go anywhere. Record an episode, we'll discuss that, and so we did. And then Joseph is like the Energizer Bunny, and he's like, why don't we do every single season of Star Trek ever? And I went, okay. And so we're up as far as DS9, but this Energizer Bunny along the way said, do you want to try and see if we can do interviews? And initially I was terrified. I was like, I didn't have anything. No, I was going to want to talk to me. And then I have to shout out the wonderful Noah Averbach-Katz, who played Rin on Star Trek Discovery's third season, the ill-fated Andorian. Was the first person to say, yeah, of course, I'd love to. And he came on. And since then, we've had Nicholas Meyer came on the podcast, which was incredible. We've had Alexander Siddig. We've had people, and sorry as I just drop all these names. My point being, one thing it showed us is how open and free the people who are making Star Trek are with their time. They're so outgoing, so lovely. I mean, I think we've spoken to half of the people making Star Trek Prodigy. So lovely, so wonderful. So take me out of the equation. The Clone Star Pod, the interviews are seriously interesting. Some of the stories that are coming out are so cool. As of recording of this, the episode we dropped just yesterday was with Nami Meluman, who does the music for Prodigy and Strange New Worlds. She's an incredible composer. She did a little indie film as well, Thor: Love and Thunder. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. Small film.
Small production.
Yeah. One of those micro budget films. And like that, people are just so open and honest. That's another thing as well. if you go back to say the release of some of the older films, and you think of the press junkets, and you've all the people go, "This is the best film ever. We made the best film ever." And you go forward 20 years, and you've got Marina Sirtis sitting at a convention going, Nemesis sucked. You're like, okay, well, you do get, not that you don't have people saying this sucked and that sucked, but you get very honest answers, and that's lovely. That's been really interesting for us as fans as well. So my very long answer to that is, please do check out the Clone Star Pod. And then, yes, I'm all over social media. I'm at Seán Ferrick on Twitter. I'm at prince.trek on Instagram because I have notions.
Nice. And we'll make sure we put those down in the show notes below as well. We will have all of our Gray 17 links down there. Seán, thank you so much for agreeing to be here with us, and especially on a St. Patrick's Day special, to have you on this day of all days with us. And we look forward to more Trek culture and more Star Trek in general.
Good of Mila Mahagut. Thank you very much. Live long and prosper.